everyone, and welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk featuring Lisa Donovan in conversation with Kim Severson for discussion of Lisa's memoir, Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger. I'm Kate Whitman, the Vice President of Author Programs and Community Engagement for the History Center, and I'm glad that you're here with us this evening. You can purchase copies of Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger from Acapella Books at the link in the chat to the right of your screen. And there's also a link provided at the History Center's website. As Lisa and Kim are talking, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Kim will get to as many of them as time allows, and try to use that instead of the chat because that's where she'll be looking. Lisa Donovan has redefined what it means to be a Southern baker as the pastry chef to some of the South's most influential chefs, including Margot McCormick, Tandy Wilson, and Sean Brock. Unabashedly serving her church cakes and pies to finished fine dining experiences, she's been formative in establishing a technique-driven and historically rich narrative of Southern pastry. Donovan received a James Beard Award for her writing in Food and Wine, where she's a regular contributor. She's been featured speaker at Renee Redzepi's globally renowned MAD Symposium, and Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger is her first book. Kim Severson is a Southern-based correspondent for the New York Times and covers the nation's food culture. She reports on food news, contributes to New York Times Cooking, and was part of the team that won a Pulitzer in 2018 for public service for reporting on workplace sexual harassment. Thank you both for being here. Kim, I am going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who showed up tonight for this. I love your book. I have it here. It's so good. Yeah. I marked it. I dog-eared pages, which I know you're not supposed to do, but sometimes you're just.
I love a dog-eared book.
Yeah, I think, and the last time that I saw you in person was for one of these Atlanta History Center events. Mm-hmm. And I was talking with Ruth Reichel in April of 2019 about her book, Save Me the Plums. And the last time I saw you, I think I dropped you guys off, and Samin Nasrat was in town for her book, and it was like a whole thing, and I dropped you guys off, and I think you drank late into the night, and
you and Samin had the good sense to get out while you could, and me, Angie Mosier, and Ruth Reichel really took advantage of the night.
She's like your ride or die, isn't she, Angie?
Yeah, she is. And, I think, Angie Mosier.
Tell people who don't know who Angie Mosier is. Those
Angie
of us who.
Mosier is, St. Angie Mosier, Lady of the Layer Cakes. She's in Atlanta. You all probably know her, those of you from Atlanta that are tuning in. She is a phenomenal Atlanta baker who used to own a bakery years ago. Kind of one of the OG Southern bakers, and now for the last, since I've known her, so over a decade or so, has been one of the most formative photographers in food, cookbooks and all kinds of things. And she's just wildly talented. She sings beautifully. We have the best time together, and so we
it's like a Steely Dan thing that you guys
we
have.
A little bit of a Steely Dan thing. I hope she's watching this.
We're already, just so you know, we're already getting heckled a little bit because the questions came in. Thank you, Tammy Cook, who says, who doesn't know who Angie Mosier is? But I'll say to you, Tammy, we perhaps have a national audience, and I'm just,
Hey, Tammy,
let me handle this, okay?
But so I think, Ruth Reichel, I won't say she met her match, but she definitely, met her drinking peers that night.
That girl, she can go. She can go.
Time. We had a really good time.
Do you remember much about what you conversed with? Because Ruth is also, like you, one of my, I guess, a mentor and someone I look up to quite a bit. And I remember, she actually really, I think, defined the modern food memoir genre when she wrote Tender at the Bone in 1998. And I don't know, I recall very much being like, it was like an entire new form. Now, of course, it's a well-worn form and one that you've executed really well. I want to talk about writing food memoir.
It is a little well-worn, but I can remember being, fresh into curiosity in 1998. I think I was just a couple of years out of high school, and I was already sort of tuned into her writing, and it sort of segued. I hope she doesn't take offense to this. Sort of segued from like a Nora Ephron, obsession, where I realized all these movies that I kind of grew up watching that I liked and loved and sort of became part of my DNA, that just were almost background material for my my life. I realized a woman had actually wrote these books. It's like that realization at 18 that holy shit, there are human beings behind this, and to know that there's this one supernova behind it, of Nora Ephron. And then it sort of led to this discovery of Ruth Reichel while I was discovering, that I actually wanted to cook for a living. So it was a really interesting synthesis in my life, And
right. So was that the first time that you had met her?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was. We've had some subsequent meetings since then, but I think that was the very first. Yeah.
So, what did you talk about when you were all drunk late at night with Ruth Reichel?
We talked about very tender things that women talk about. She's, I am, and Angie is in this vein, and our I think you're probably also in this vein, even though I think you have a little bit more of a journalistic heart, and you kind of, maybe you're a little more voyeuristic, but
Not into my issues around intimacy.
I'm going to turn this right around on you, Kim Severson. Anyway, we had this ability to like be women together, even though, she's just remarkably sincere and honest and truthful and just herself. She brings everything to the table, and it's just really rare that you meet that. And it was so exciting for me because I think I'm always ratcheting down so that I don't terrify people with like all the things I want to say and all the things I'm feeling. And she just is this beautiful example of a woman ahead of me that doesn't actually give a fuck. She's going to say what she has to say, and it's going to come from like a real deep place of thoughtfulness. And, even if she takes it back one day, she's going to say it, she's going to say like, yeah. And we talked about publishing. We talked about our marriages. We talked about all of the things. It was really a special evening.
Yeah.
It was really a special evening.
I think she does do that. She was one of the first women writers in the genre who truly was honest. Again, I like that she has this idea of truthiness in memoir, which is, a difficult thing for me to jump into when I was writing a memoir. Is like, how can I prove that this really happened? I don't have the actual quote. And she had this idea of truthiness, but that aside, there's an honesty in her that, and you're right, she says what she thinks, and it doesn't.
Yeah. And it's such a great thing for me. Yeah, it's such a powerful thing for someone like me, gender removed from the entire conversation, to see just someone out in the world that's like, here it is. Yeah. Like, take it for what it's worth and go do what you want with it. And I just really value that. Like, I didn't agree with everything she said, but it was so interesting to just hear her take on things and to say, I'm going to take that with me. And it's with me, like constant. It was with me when I wrote this book. It was, we talked about, writing, we talked about publishing, we talked about music, we talked about all the things. And so, when you meet someone like that, and maybe it's not so formative for other people who aren't, doing what I'm trying to do in my life, but it was very formative, spending some time with her.
Let's talk about the intimate. This book is very intimate book, and did you have a hard time deciding, what you would include? There are scenes when you are just broken on the floor, and scenes of domestic and sexual violence in here. You talk about just being like truly broke ass survival level poor, and the secrets in your family around your grandmother and grandfather, and the way, it's kind of like a pearl growing in an oyster. There's that essential thing that everybody doesn't talk about, and then it grows and grows and becomes the family. How did you decide how intimate to be when you wrote this? And are there things that you held back? Not that I expect you to tell us now, but how did you make that choice to go as far as you went?
I mean, I'll tell you, I didn't know. I didn't know that. I think it's fair to say that I was just as surprised as anybody with like where I landed with a lot of things. And I knew that what I really wanted to prioritize, I set a couple of really important sort of markers for myself of like, I don't want to use this book as therapy. This isn't I'm not trying to indict anybody here. And also, is any story I tell useful to the bigger picture? And then that creates this space where you have to really decide what your bigger picture is. And at some point I decided this was actually more of a conversation I was trying to have with myself about all of the allowances I had made as a woman and why. And I really wanted to face that in the truest sense I possibly could. And that what that ended up meaning, which I wasn't aware of at the time, because I probably would have backed the fuck out real fast if I had realized like where it was going to take me and how far it was going to take me. I think if you are engaging in the act of writing memoir, you have to decide at some point, or I had to decide at some point, that I was going to do this with integrity and honesty, and that I was going to actually try to speak to this bigger narrative of what am I trying to undo here? And it has to start like here. And so it ended up going places that, I knew I really wanted to talk about rape and abortion in particular, because that is a thing that I think women carry with them that we still have a really hard time addressing in the public court, figuratively and literally. And I think it's really unjust that women have to carry the burden of these stories and these pains, not even amongst ourselves, but solely as individuals. I mean, these are things I just told my mom yesterday. I was like, Mom, these are things that I barely even have told my best friends. We don't talk. These are things women do not talk about because we feel this, ingrained, not all of us, I don't want to generalize, but I do think that we are sort of conditioned to carry the weight of these pains forever. And I really wanted to just undo that. I wanted all of that. I wanted to not necessarily be free of that. I wanted to just finally accept that this is a truth for a lot of women. This is a reality for a lot of women. And until we can say its name in public, we're never going to be able to move beyond it. We're always going to be 24 women accusing the president, or 48, however fucking many women are accusing him. Why does it take all of these women to take down a Bill Cosby? Why does it take all of these women to take down a Harvey Weinstein? Why does it take all of these women to take down a Mario Batali? Why doesn't it take just one woman? And that is a cultural thing that I think we have sort of been conditioned to believe is our burden. And I'm just tired of that being our burden. And it's been my burden my whole life. And my mother's traumas and pains have been my burden my whole life. And her mother's traumas and pains have been my burden my whole life. And the same goes for my mother, and the same goes for my grandmother. And so you see this really fucked up lineage of trauma and pain that we just keep handing to each other like a big fucking stinky turd that we're supposed to just put back on our backs. And and it makes everything harder. It makes our work harder. It makes asking for a raise harder. It makes standing in a position of power harder, because it all feels like for me, I really want to avoid generalizations, because this is very specific to my experience, but I also think it's a very universal thing for women my age. Everything started to feel like a pantomime, of I can be in this space. I'm going to be in this space. But really, I didn't want to. Actually, what I realized when I left the restaurant industry was I didn't want that space. I wanted a space that allowed me to sort of exist within it the way I actually am. And here I was doing
feminist moment, like, see, the door's open and now here I am. Like, was it, when you talk about your generation, was it this idea that, I don't know, you were coming into the party in a post-feminist way, and so here you could be in with in this very
I
male
think,
restaurant
I
structure?
think it was the moment that I realized feminism was bullshit. You know, it was the moment I realized that all the women that came before me that had burned their bras and, you know, stood in the courtyard saying we can take these birth control pills and control our, it was all bullshit. It actually didn't help me at all. And it sure shit isn't helping Black women still to this day. And it sure shit isn't helping Mexican women to this day. You know, like there's this like really insidious sort of idea that because there was a moment in time that everything went away. And that keeps happening, this gradualism, this idea that like, you know, I mean, Charlotte Druckmann just wrote a beautiful piece today in the Washington Post about, you know, this idea of trends and like the trend, you know, 5 years ago. And of course, I'm grateful to be a part of it. And I'm so grateful I finally had a space to write this. And the people that I'm working directly with are not, you know, trying to just, you know, follow a trend. They believe in me. But why did it take sort of this colossal movement just for white women to get heard? And now we have to sort of, you know what I mean? Like there's just this sort of strange idea that the generation before us fixed it all. And we grew up with this idea that if you just showed up and worked hard enough, you could make it. You could make it. And
But I
of
would
course,
say that a woman in the 80s might have been saying the same thing, or the 70s. I mean, I think it's it's part of a spectrum, and I don't think anyone who's part of the feminist movement thought it was fixed, although I think there was movement. And again, it's just this pattern, like this has, you know, we honestly could have probably had the same conversation in the 70s. We may not have. And I think, you know, issues.
well, I think the difference is, though, women that were born in a certain time were told that it was almost our fault if we couldn't push through, right? Like we set the stage. You just have to put your head down. I don't know how many times women that I still adore and who mentored me as chefs and, you know, in the kitchen were like, you just gotta put your head down and put your blinders on and get through it. I don't know how many times I heard, and I don't know how many times I saw women leave, and then the whole narrative of, well, she just couldn't handle it. She couldn't hack it. She you know, she didn't belong here anyway. You know, and it's like, or you guys made it so insufferably bad that, you know, women have a different tolerance. We're playing by kind of different rules that actually make a more sustainable lifestyle. And that's taking a lot of women out of a certain arena of work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you guys keep insisting upon, which thankfully has been exposed and no longer, you know, today I was like, looking at I had a minute, and I don't know what did it, but I just had a real moment of like missing and nostalgia for Anthony Bourdain, and I just kind of wanted to hear his voice. And I went and found an old interview from right when Kinship Confidential came out, and I was like, come on, man. Like he was generating this narrative, and I adore him and I love him, and the whole world knows every bit of like his value and why he was such an important part of this world, even outside of the restaurant industry. But there were moments where I was like, well, that didn't help us any, man. Like that didn't help push the like needle the direction it needed to go.
He had to go on his own sort of woke journey around women, and I think was still in process with that in many ways.
I think that's true. I mean, and we're all on a path, right? Like it's a, you know, it's complicated. It's complicated to get where you hope to be able to do like the best version of your work and also continue to keep having a conversation that's challenging, like who's in front of you to bring up who's behind you. I think that's the real goal, you know.
Let's talk about restaurants a little bit and your experience there, and where we think restaurants might be heading. So I was really surprised by two things, and the two the narratives in your book that are the biggest restaurant narratives to me that were so interesting was your time at City House and your time with at Husk. And when you went and asked for a raise at a place that you basically helped open and filled in and were the opening pastry chef at City House, and you were kind of brushed off for a fancy new smoker that they were going to put in the back that he was, and also there were two other chefs that came in on the savory side that were men that got salaries.
Well, you know, all of that is loosely based on, you know, and the real trick of memoir is trying to include the details that, again, I go back to sort of my original statement of like, I'm not really trying to indict anyone here. I've made choices. I could have left sooner. I could have said, this isn't working for me and my family. See ya. You know, I really am a big advocate for taking full ass responsibility for my life and my decisions. Like that is a real big thing for me. What I was trying to kind of convey in that storytelling, I think I'm remembering it as accurately as I can remember it. I was very close with the chef owner at the time. And I pieced together a lot of conversations that, you know, I didn't necessarily want to put down on paper that were kind of bigger and sort of cute, like really clued me into sort of his feelings about the women in the restaurant being, you know, they were sort of second fiddle. And so I was really trying to have a conversation about how more than the 25 cents or the 50 cents or the smoker out back, I was really trying to put together this understanding I was having that I was actually just support staff. I was never going to be anything more to this particular person than someone that showed up to make him feel, you know, and that is, you know what, I'm a cook, I'm here to like make this restaurant better, and I was super committed. I guess I just sort of understood that there would never be a reciprocal commitment and investment being made in me. And that is sort of the, I think, the real continuously nagging thing about being so committed to a restaurant is your cooks will always understand how thin your margins are. They will always understand. And if they're good cooks, they will work through it and they will commit and they'll prove to you, even though they should start out on better footing, you know, like they will prove to you that they are there to take one for the team time and time again. And I think it was really a hard awakening for me to realize that I was always going to sort of be seen as someone that just didn't want to be a bored housewife, you know, didn't want to like, oh, you know, my husband's supposed salary was always going to shield me from like having my own kind of thing. And that was a real shock to me. That was hearing that those words.
I don't think that happened anymore, but I guess it does. So.
Oh yeah, like hearing those words get sent to me from someone's mouth whom I loved and cared about and had just committed over a year's worth of like very dedicated work was like,
yeah.
What? What is like, my husband has nothing to do with my career and what I'm providing for my family. And I'm not, you know, and this was at the time also that like, you know, my father-in-law was, you know, saying things to me like, well, sugar, why you got to work? And I'm like, don't you understand how the world works? Like, and also, even if there is no middle class anymore, I would still have this sort of, this idea of who I am outside of my children and my husband, just like you and just like my husband, your son. And like, why am I still having this conversation of the value of like women working? What the fuck year is it? Like,
and it's surprising, you know, because you know, these ostensibly younger men who are seen progressive, that still could be kind of a blind spot. And then when you went to work at Husk, I was also surprised that you were, those are my dogs that you can hear. So. That you made, and I think it was like $15 an hour. You were the head of the pastry department at Husk, Nashville, and Charleston at the time, and you were still making $15 an hour, which
and me going to Charleston was a favor.
Right.
Sean asked me as a favor to do that. And that's as plainly as I've ever said it in public, but that's the truth. He walked me through the garden and said, can you do me a favor? And basically that favor was to give him all of my intellectual property for the entire Husk enterprise and empire. And I did it. And and so that was sort of the beginning of me thinking, what is this industry that I'm in? Who is running the show here? Who is like, you know, when I left Husk, it was also at this time where, you know, I'm cautious to talk about Sean's personal feelings and experiences because, you know, even though he and I have had some very real, very hard, and sometimes very public disagreements about things, you know, I see his humanity and I see something about him that keeps me very tethered to him as a human person, and I care about him very deeply.
You write very lovingly about him, and very, he's a very complex and special person on this earth.
He is, and he has, you know, he really, I think the thing that he and I share the most in common is that we come from loving, caring families, but ultimately we don't come from like much, right? Like we're both very scrappy and very hungry, and that is the thing that I think in him I connect with the most. And so I take care of that for myself and for him, because I really, you know, even though it might not be popular or fashionable in this day and age, I really care deeply about preserving relationships. And I think that's really sort of I think that therein lies some of the answers to a lot of our questions is, you know, this, I wouldn't say like it's grace necessarily, but just a remembrance of like what attracted me to this person to begin with. The things that I went through in his orbit, that, you know, I can also step back and say he is responsible for a lot of this, and he was also a victim of a lot of this, you know, in some ways. And, you know, again, I'm very cautious. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think we're in this, you know, we're all complex, flawed humans, right? And we're in an era of a real burn it down kind of era that doesn't allow, or we're figuring out where that line is. Like,
yeah,
if I see flawed and I accept this behavior, but wait, where's the line? Is it, okay, he did slap that woman on that ass one time, but maybe that's, or is that completely, you're gone, you're canceled?
I don't know that it's
the area we're in, we're still trying to find that line. And I think cancel culture and social media as a tool for that, it's a tricky place, you know, and I spent a lot of time trying to kind of understand where culture is, right? So are we in an era where we're not allowing the flaws in people, or is that accepting shit that we just don't need to accept anymore? You know what I mean? That's I don't know where we are with that right now.
There are people, you know, there are people that I have completely cut out of my life because I know that the character flaws that they have presented that are problematic are so deeply connected to the things, you know, convenient liars, opportunists, people that use an opportunity to get out of a contract, you know, like there are people that I can recognize, and it's just my instinct, and I don't know how the rest of the world needs to do what they need to do, but for me, I know when a person is worth making the effort for myself, you know, and I think everyone needs to sort of decide what their version of that is. And then I hope, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, but I hope that we can start to have a little bit of compassion for, and this is not me being an apologist for anyone, because anybody, I mean, there has not been a single moment where I have not gone head to head with Sean about things that I have felt were very, very detrimental to myself and the people that worked for us. And we still have a lot of talking to do, you know, and I think we're trying to sort of like pace ourselves a little bit because there's a lot of content to cover, you know.
Right.
But I do see what he is actually worth as a human. And I think, and that's a shitty way of saying it, I take that back. Everyone's worth something as a human, but I see what I connect to in him. And I think when I meet someone in the world that I actually don't value, you know, the bullshit that they sort of masquerade around in, I can put that over there. And I think the real trick for me at this age, you know, I don't know that I am not a burn it down person, you know. I don't know that I'm not a like, but what I want to burn down is like the infrastructure that keeps these people in power. It doesn't matter to me that you fire Adam Rappaport. You got to get this shit all the way down, you know. And I think I'm trying to sort of assess what my privilege and opportunities are in this space, and try to like make the right phone calls and talk to the right people and push the envelope in the places that the envelope can get pushed for actual effectual change that isn't just a public sort of statement. You know, I've made enough public performative statements in my life. Right now at this phase, and as I'm going into the second part of my life, what I really, really want is to do less like talking about what needs to happen and just get to the thing. Right. And I think that can get misconstrued, but I also don't want to take any power away from, even though it's something that feels you know, like a propane fire. Like it feels bigger than any movement I've ever felt in both good and bad ways. I have been 35 and 25 and 20, and I have been young, and I have been full of kind of rage that just wanted to, you know, end it all for anyone that even came near that kind of thinking that would hold anybody back. And I've been there. I know that feeling, and I will never, ever discourage, as you know, as was in the Goodfellas, the youths from, you know, from finding and taking control of our culture from that power. That is a really important thing. Is it a little intimidating to me because of the power of social media? Only because I'm old. You know, only because I've aged out of sort of knowing how to maneuver that space. But I watch my kids know exactly, you know, my kids are 20. I have grown kids, you know, I don't have like little kids. I have grown kids that are very aware of politics, of culture, of society, of, you know, all of the really incredibly important things that are happening in the world. And they know how to manage that. They know how to use it, put it to work, and then they know how to get to work. I think it's a little trickier for us. We feel a little bit overwhelmed by it because it's a conversation that it's not like, you know, like I could get all dressed in black, put my mask on, get my backpack on, get my, you know, gasoline and blow up a little fence that was protecting animals that were being tested on. And I would go get the rabbits and the, you know, like I could do all of that. No one would ever know, you know, like no one would ever know. It was the 90s. No one ever cared. You could go, I'm just.
Did you? Were you that? Okay.
Theoretically.
That wasn't in the book. No. I didn't know.
Because if you write it down, then you're held accountable.
Right.
I get it. My point is, I just fucking get it. And I value that fire. And I value that passion and that urgency to hold people accountable. Mm-hmm. For me, at 42 years old, I am so hungry to find the answer in seeing a human being in their moment and in my moment and in the moments that we make the world together. And I really am trying my best to temper what feels wild in me so that I can be a little bit more actually effective, which isn't always easy. But it feels like a real responsibility.
You graduated to assistant manager of the revolution. So
or, you know, even the person that takes out the trash, like, right. Because you need those, right? Like you need various levels of understanding of how things change. Right. And that's it. Like, I don't give a fuck about having a conversation about cancel culture or the value of it or what it is or who is or who isn't. You know, tomorrow someone could write a letter talking about what a shit boss I was, and that's not going to be untrue. You know, what I hope is that I can continue doing some amount of work that is simply just effective, that still kind of respects the humanity and the people that I'm meeting, if they deserve it.
Right.
That's the catch. That's the caveat. If they deserve it. There are people fuck them. I hope they go this way. I don't ever see
Speaking of fuck them, we hope they go this way. Let's talk a little broadly about the change that we're seeing both in restaurants and in social culture, and the Venn diagram where they meet. I feel like we were already nipping at changing restaurant culture. We were already overheated. There was more than we could
I agree.
eat at. There were PR companies all over, like I can't even tell you what it was like to be on this end of that. And,
Or this
yeah, I mean, we couldn't keep up, right? We couldn't eat enough. Like, it was like content. We couldn't watch enough. We couldn't eat enough. We couldn't go to enough restaurants. So now we've had this great collapse and chilling, and we've been able to, and that the pandemic, I think, has softened the ground. We had Me Too happening in restaurants. You had people, tipping culture was starting to crumble. You had some progressive restaurants starting to say, you know what, if we provide some kind of late childcare late at night, then our families can actually, people who have families can work in restaurants. Like, how do we make that happen? It all seems sort of left or right coast and fringy and interesting, but now the whole structure's collapsed, and it's a painful collapse. But does this mean out of these ashes is going to grow the revolution that people were talking about pre-pandemic? Do you feel there will be a rebuilding of how we
I mean, if you had asked me a month ago, I would have been like, yes, I have so much hope. And today, where I'm at today, and I'm grateful that our audience is also in pandemic mode, because from day to day, it just changes of like,
yeah,
I don't know. And my fear, I'm watching, I mean, God, Uncle Boone's just closed today, and, and places in my hometown are closing left and right, and places in New Orleans are closing left and right, everywhere. And I think my greatest fear is that the capitalists are going to win. Like the people who invested in restaurants and built restaurants the wrong way are the only ones that are going to survive. And I know that's not like the buoy and the hopefulness we all need, but today that's what I'm with right now, is this real feeling of like, fuck, we're going to lose all the things that were the only things that actually kept me going. I mean, you can't work in the restaurant industry, and I would even argue you can't work adjacent to the restaurant industry without just being so dedicated and falling madly in love with it, because that's who you are and that's who you are of. And that is I am very close to my family and I love my family. That is also my family. I feel so much pain for, and I'm of course like counting my lucky stars, and this is a terrible thing to say, like I'm just counting my lucky stars that like I'm not in the middle of it, but that I just get to be support staff, but it's hard. It is like a slow death every day, and that sounds really emotional and dramatic, but it's just I think a month ago, even a week ago, even a different day, if you had asked me, I would have felt this urgency to say like, everyone's gonna make it and da-da-da. And I think of course, we can still buy ourselves time, and we can continue to have fundraisers and support our restaurant industry and the people that we now know. I think what I do hope is that our communities at large and our government understands how essential the labor force of the restaurant industry is to our communities, and how that the restaurants tether communities into each other. And I think if we can come out of this with any sort of spotlight, it's on how important these small restaurants, it's never the big ones. It's never the ones that, that are owned by, venture capitalists that have an empire of restaurants, or a restaurant group, or, that turn over their dishwashers all the time. It's the restaurants that have 25 employees and they've had the same dishwasher for 10 years. And, and
I think that's what people miss, I think that's what people are longing for in a way. We're not longing for a tasting menu. We're longing for that
I mean,
place.
I hope we find our way back there, but I just don't want it to be at the expense of the ones that already exist. Do you know? I don't want us to have to lose the ones that already are there for us to remember that was what it was all about to begin with. That's really what I'm really grappling with. I think we're all grappling with in this moment.
Can I ask you a question that some of our listener or what our viewers are asking? So someone says, just in relation to this a little bit, what changes do you think need to happen in the food industry for more representation of people of color, Black and Indigenous people?
Hire them, you know. I mean, I think the people that are running the show have to realize at some point. I mean, you know, I think that there's this funny story that I've been dying to tell. I feel like the South is such a good leader in these conversations in some ways because we're kind of doing them in real time. And, you know, I went to this women's conference a couple of years ago, and I was on 4 panels, and on every panel I said, this is incredible. This feels really good. But until men are sitting in this room, we got nothing. And everyone heard that as this sort of like in defense of men. And I was like, fuck men, but here's the reality. Well, so I'll back up a little bit. So my last panel, I said it again. And then, you know, I convened, you know, all the participants were leaving, and I convened with one of the women who is a woman of color who lives in San Francisco, who owns a restaurant. And she's like, I don't know, man, why did you say that about men need to be here? Just, you know, if you're talking about funding, just go get like a female VC. Let's keep all the money with women. And I was like, that's a great, and I didn't say this because I need more time to think than I like to give myself. I like to think I'm fast on my feet, but I'm really not. I need time to think. I actually think better when I'm writing things down. I don't think great on my feet when I'm in conversation. And I went, oh, interesting. And then kind of let it be. And then approximately 8 minutes later, I was like, bitch, there ain't no fucking women VCs in Mobile, Alabama. Like, there, you know why I say men need to be in the room when we're talking about how impossibly hard it is to get funding for women in the restaurant industry, much less, you know, Black women or Black men. I mean, the numbers are staggering when you look at small restaurant funding for the Small Business Association. White men, white men, white men, white men, and then you get white women. It's just like what Charlotte wrote today. White women, you know, we'll give white women some things, and then Black women and Black men and Indigenous people get nothing.
Yeah.
And so if you want to have the really hard conversations about how you change the restaurant industry, you don't have to like it. But in the South, that means that you have to get white male bank executives in the room to hear you say, fuck you, what are you doing to fix this?
Bankers like that when you say, fuck you, what are you doing to fix it?
They love it, which is why I have 5 bakeries right now.
Yeah, and I've always found that to be successful for me too. So, but I take your point.
I don't know how many times I have sat across from, and it's not even, in the South at least, it's not even old middle-aged men. It's 30-year-old men whose daddies run the bank.
Right, and they're on the jet ski over at Lake Lanier. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
I went into a loan meeting. It was my 3rd loan meeting and I was trying to finally just do it on my own because all of these investors with a lot of money had so many ridiculous conversations they wanted to have about my labor costs versus their opening costs. And I was like, or you could just take the $20,000 you want to spend on, you know, ugly sconces and pay my head baker a living wage. They didn't want to have those conversations. So I spent a couple of years really trying to do it on my own. The 3rd meeting I had with this one gentleman at my bank, who was probably not a day over nothing, comes in 45 minutes late because he was on what did he call it? It was like a extreme frisbee competition in Aspen. And I was like, I'm dead in the water.
Yeah, you're not getting anything.
So anyway, my point is, like, how do we have to, we have to really acknowledge that the people in power, at least in the Southeast, have to be held accountable in public.
Right.
If you really want to have a women's conference, you need to get all of these 30 to 70-year-old white male bank executives on the panel and have them ask and have to be answering questions from women about what they're going to do. Right. About this incredible disparity between who gets funded and who doesn't.
Right.
And I feel like the South is always a little bit of the canary in the coal mine of like, you know, we're having to sort of go against the greatest odds in so many ways.
Right. No, that's definitely, you have some real conversations down here that you don't in other parts of the country, I think.
It's very true. So yeah, there's a lot of answers to that question, but that's where I sit with it right now, which is like, we have to, and that goes back to my original statement of like, I'm less interested in, you know, publicly crucifying the one person and breaking down the entire infrastructure. That's what I want to burn down. I want to get, you know, we have to talk about getting, you know, Black men and Black women in, you know, bank leadership. We have to get, you know, like, it has to be an entire thing. We can't just talk about, you know, hiring a Black chef. We need to take it all down and
I believe you're describing systemic racism right there. That's what we need to change.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So for me, I just, you know, I think the most readily available access we have to these people is politely inviting them to an all-woman conference.
All right.
Where they have to answer
that in post-pandemic times. Yeah. I know we're kind of short on time, but I have a few questions here. Can you play a lightning round so that anybody who's watching can get their questions? There's just a few here. And right now is your time. If anybody's still, you want to throw in a question, now is your time to do it. Okay. So I know a lot of kitchens play music, often hard rock or metal because of male chefs controlling the selection. Well, I know some women like hard rock. Do you listen to music when you cook, and what inspires you?
Yes, and also thank you for acknowledging how much shit music I've had to listen to my whole life in the kitchen. Some brunches I would be listening to, like, I like to start my mornings out a little quiet, a little slow, a little Leonard Cohen, a little, you know, Tom Waits, some easy, like, gravelly voices to just sort of help me, like, get my fruit all processed. And it wouldn't take the sous chefs but 10 minutes to get in, and all of a sudden I was listening to like, like terrible music. And I was just like, why is this productive for anybody? So, you know, you can always tell whenever you're in a kitchen full of women, because two things will be evident. There will be really good music. It'll usually be like the Kinks or the Velvet Underground or LCD Sound System. And the glove sizes will always be medium. Yeah. It's amazing.
All right, now here, and this is just completely kind of random, just throwing them at you as they come up. This person Georgia has asked nutritionists this question. They can't give me an answer. Why can't I find canned or frozen wax beans anymore? That's a good Southern cook question. Are wax beans disappearing? Are you a bean? Are you eating a lot of beans out of the garden? Right now I have tons of beans in my fridge, but are wax disappearing? Just throwing it, I'm just.
You know, I think I'm very lucky because at my Publix here in Nashville, they have not canned, but glass jarred wax beans.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. And they also have glass jarred white beans, and it's just this old, like, I mean, it's been around for over 100 years. I must be lucky. I don't know.
Right. Is there such thing as a Southern dessert? I mean, you essentially defined Southern dessert for the national consciousness, but is there such a thing as a Southern dessert?
If you go back far enough, no.
Okay. All right.
But my heart says yes.
Your food is so good. I am such a fan of your dessert. Banged out some of those chocolate pudding cups. What do you make of the journey male chefs often take from bad boy to woke and focused on work-life balance only when they have a child? But that's true of all of us. Having children changes you, don't you think?
Yes, having children changes you, but it's not a get out of jail free card. You know?
Don't get this. Okay.
Yeah. I think there's nothing more grotesque than when a man says, "Oh, I have a daughter," and that all of a sudden makes.
Oh, right. Like only people with daughters get to not be a jerk. Like what?
Yeah, like, oh, that means you're not a total complete misogynist. Okay.
Right.
Right.
And then just to talk about your own kids, did you have them read the book before it was published, and did they get to have a say in what was in it, and what did they think?
I tried. My daughter has read more of it than my son. My son is 20. My daughter will be 16 soon, and she's read more of it. My son won't touch it. He's like, look, he's like, I just, it's a little bit more personal for him. I did ask their permission. Like, I'm telling all of our stories in some ways. In particular, for Joseph, it's a little more acute because there's a past there. There's a biological sort of narrative for him. But he was like, no, Mom, it's important that you talk about this. You've never talked about it, and it's not my story. It's your story. You raised me in a way where it wasn't my story. So I don't care. He doesn't care, but he also kind of is at 20, not ready to read about it,
Right. Because then you'd have to think about your mother's vagina, and no 20-year-old boy wants to think about that.
It's real basic level.
It's easier for you to get the book because there's, I'm not even going to tell you what's in it, but I got to parts of it, and I just was like, I just think it was brilliant. And I know how hard this is, and you did an amazing job. And I didn't know what to expect. I was going to be like, oh God, I hope it's not, and it was amazing. And I was moved very emotionally as a woman and as a mom and as a writer and as a food person. So I just want to say on behalf of all of us who haven't struggled through this process in a while, thank you for doing it. And thank you for making the world a better place, Miss Lisa Donovan.
Thanks, man. This was fun. Thanks for asking. Nice question. A good question.
They said we had to wrap up in this awkward way that these Zoom calls end. So I will see you after the pandemic time, Sister Fire, and we will get it on, okay?
Thanks, Kim.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Buy the book. It's great.